Coming up on today's show, I want to run through the updated depth charts for the Broncos after free agency and now the NFL draft. But help me reach our next milestone of 22,000 subscribers. If you're looking for a free Broncos YouTube channel, hit the sub button down below. Let's talk about the Broncos depth charts after the NFL draft. See who I have slated as starters if a game was tomorrow versus who is coming in off the bench as reserves. Let's go in order of what seems most logical. Offense to defense, starting at quarterback. And to me, I still have Jarrett Stidham as this team's starting quarterback. Doesn't mean that can't change after a 6-week-long training camp battle with Bo Nix. But if the team had a game tomorrow, I think Jarrett Stidham would be this team's starting quarterback. And I understand Bo Nix, first-round pick, you'd think he'd be a shoo-in to be the starter when Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson are the quarterbacks on the roster. But it does serve as a good reminder that there are lots of instances of quarterbacks getting taken in the first round of the draft that were not week one starters. If we go down memory lane with me, Kenny Pickett was not a week one starter. Trey Lance, different situation, kind of similar for Justin Fields, where they had a veteran quarterback who was a lot better than Jarrett Stidham. Tua did not start week one. Justin Herbert actually did not even start week one. Tyrod Taylor did. Of course, Jordan Love didn't, but that was always the plan. Daniel Jones did not start, along with Dwayne Haskins. Baker Mayfield also did not start week one, and he was the first overall pick in the draft. He was cucked by Tyrod Taylor, just like Justin Herbert. Josh Allen didn't even start week one. I think Nathan Peterman did, and Josh Allen took over mid-game, and the rest has been history. Josh Rosen did not start week one. That was probably a good idea to just not start him ever. And Lamar, of course, did not start week one. So for now, I do think it is Jarrett Stidham's job, but obviously there's a guy breathing down his neck. And when we get to minicamp and mandatory minicamp and into training camp, I do think Jarrett Stidham will open up as the starter, but it's going to be nearly 50-50 between Stidham and Bo Nix. And you may see Nix pass him after 1 or 2 preseason games, but we're doing a depth chart video in May, not in August. And for today's depth chart, I think Jarrett Stidham is still this team's starting quarterback. But predict it for me below. Who will be the week one starter? Jarrett Stidham or Bo Nix? Obviously, Sean Payton likes Bo Nix a lot, but let's not forget one of his first loves, which was Jarrett Stidham. He gave a 2-year, $10 million contract to in free agency after the guy started 2 games for the Raiders. So don't rule out Stidham that quickly. Let's get into the running backs now. Not anything major here. Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, Samaje Perine. I think those 3 guys are your top 3 backs, and I don't think the Notre Dame running back Audric Estime is going to really change that up much. Wide receivers now. Courtland Sutton, Marvin Mims, and Josh Reynolds. I have them as the top 3 wide receivers. Tim Patrick could definitely come back and take that job from Josh Reynolds. It's just really hard to say because we've hardly even seen Tim Patrick play like a training camp battle, more or less an actual football game in the last 2 years. Troy Franklin, 4th-round pick out of Oregon, I think rightfully so. He is going to be a reserve wide receiver, not one of the top 3 guys to go out into the field with the first-team offense. But while we're talking about the wide receiver room, I do want to highlight Marvin Mims, who I have in as wide receiver 2. I've got big hopes and expectations and overall optimism and belief for the former Oklahoma Sooner this year. We saw some really good play from him earlier on last year, and then the offense kind of just went away from Marvin Mims, and I'm not really sure how much of that was a product of Russell Wilson's choice with Courtland Sutton, which Sean Payton wanted to do. But I think with Bo Nix there and a fresh start at quarterback, I think Marvin Mims can kind of pick up where he sort of like left off, where he had a really good game against the Washington Commanders last year, and then we just didn't see much of him outside of special teams after that. So I've got high hopes for Marvin Mims in 2024. Moving on to the tight end room, no additions really made here outside of 2 UDFAs. So it's still Adam Trautman, Greg Dulcich, and Lucas Krull as the team's top 3 tight ends. Offensive line. All right, here we go. Let's get testy, shall we? Garett Bolles, Ben Powers, Quinn Meinerz, Mike McGlinchey, no shit Sherlock. But I'm going to put Sam Mustipher as this team's starting center. We're going to have a battle between Sam Mustipher, Alex Forsyth, a 7th-round pick out of Oregon last year, and Luke Wattenberg, a 5th-round pick out of Washington back in 2022. But of the 3 centers on this roster, Sam Mustipher has the most experience by a mile. So I think Mustipher will actually have the starting job to open up camp, but it's not going to be like a 50-50 split. It's going to be 33, 33, 33 between Mustipher, Forsyth, and Wattenberg. But that all adds up to 99. So if I had to give one extra guy the bonus point, I think it would go to Mustipher because of all of his experience. So keep an eye on that center battle. That's going to be a fun one to watch in training camp to try and replace Lloyd Cushenberry. But grade the Broncos offense for me. A, B, C, D, or F. Not giving an A grade, not giving an F. So we're somewhere in between, and I'd probably go with a C+. Big question mark is, what does Bo Nix look like his rookie year? Does he kind of come out like Justin Herbert did, white hot, or is it a gradual, improvement, a little bit like Tua we saw? So let me know down below in the comment section how you would grade the Broncos offense. Let's get to the defensive side of the football. On the D-line, I've got Zach Allen, DJ Jones, and John Franklin Myers as this team's 3 starting defensive linemen in a 3-4 defensive front. Initially, I had Malcolm Roach as the team's starting defensive tackle, but once Denver traded for John Franklin Myers from the Jets during the draft, I think to me that was a clear upgrade over Roach. Now, Roach is a little bit more of a defensive tackle, whereas Franklin Myers is a little bit more of a defensive end. So schematically, it may not be a perfect fit, but John Franklin Myers came from a similar situation in the New York Jets defense. So I'm still concerned over the lack of run-stopping support that was added this offseason. Didn't bring back so far Mike Purcell, let Christian Harris walk, which those may be additions by subtraction, but they didn't address it in the draft, and they really didn't do enough of a job in free agency to make me feel more comfortable about a bottom 3 run-stopping unit a season ago. On to the linebackers now. I've got Jonathon Cooper and Baron Browning, pair of Buckeyes, as the starting outside linebackers, with Alex Singleton and Cody Barton as the team's starting inside linebackers. If you remember, they signed Barton in free agency after the first wave, came over from the Washington Commanders. He was a 3rd-round pick by Seattle. I think he'll start off ahead of last year's 3rd-round pick, Drew Sanders, but there's no denying that Sanders can push and compete for a starting linebacker spot. And then Nick Bonitto and Jonah Ellis, a pair of day 2 draft picks over the last few years. I think they slot in as the backups to Cooper and Browning, but I'm really excited for that rotation. I'm willing to roll the dice on, you've got a 7th-round pick, a 3rd-round pick, another 3rd-round pick, and a 2nd-round pick, all as your top 4 edge rushers, with the earliest pick being Nick Bonitto at spot 64 via the LA Rams 2 drafts ago. So Denver has not made a huge investment in that room, either in free agency or early on in the draft. The earliest pick, like we said, 64th. But screw it, I kind of like that room. I love the way Cooper and Bonitto came out last season. Then Baron Browning joined them midway through after dealing with an offseason knee injury. And those 3 guys were wreaking havoc when, if you remember, the initial starting outside linebacker duo was supposed to be Randy Gregory and Frank Clark. Kick rocks. Those guys were bums. These other guys came up and just stole the show. Added one of my favorite picks from the draft in general, Jonah Ellis. And I think that's a really good 4-man rotation that may not have a lot of name notoriety across the league, but I think it's going to be a good committee. Now, before we look at the other depth charts on the defensive side of the football, Bo Nix jerseys are here. Go to chatsports.com/Nix. Still haven't seen a jersey number announcement. Zach Wilson completely cucked him by taking the number 10 a few hours before the draft kicked off. So maybe they're working out a deal to swap numbers, but once the number is announced, even if you order the jersey today, Fanatics will ship that jersey once the number is official. So get your brand new Broncos jersey and new franchise quarterback, fingers crossed, jersey in Bo Nix at chatsports.com/Nix. Let's get to the cornerbacks now. Patrick Surtain, Jaquan McMillian retained their starting jobs. And I've got Levi Wallace, a recent free agent signing from the Pittsburgh Steelers, as the CB2 ahead of Riley Moss and Damari Mathis. And I think Chris Abrams-Drain, the 5th rounder out of Mizzou, will be McMillian's backup in the slot. But yeah, put me down as a believer as Levi Wallace will be the starting cornerback opposite of Patrick Surtain. But it's another training camp battle for Denver. I mean, this Broncos training camp is going to be filled with position battles. But ultimately, I think when you look at Wallace's body of work and what he did the last few years, 11 pass breakups, 2 interceptions a season ago, 13 the season prior, 4 picks to go along with it, it is Wallace's job to lose, which means it is Riley Moss's job to try and push for that CB2 opening. The 3rd round pick last year out of Iowa unfortunately missed the worst training camp to miss in your NFL career. Your first one, had a sports hernia injury early on, pretty much missed all the preseason games, all of training camp for the most part, and that definitely put him behind schedule, but hopefully he can come into training camp this year ready to roll, and he can compete with Levi Wallace for that CB2 job opposite of PS2. Now, we'll look at the Broncos safeties here as the Denver Broncos are without Justin Simmons no longer. They've made a couple of additions in the safety room, right? Brandon Jones will join PJ Locke as the starting cornerbacks. But the other safeties the Broncos have is Javonte and a few more names we'll throw on screen for you next. But Brandon Jones, the recent addition on the safety side of things after moving on from Justin Simmons. Last year for the Miami Dolphins, played in 16 games, 4 pass breakups, 2 interceptions. So I think Jones and Locke are your starters, but De'Aaron Turner-Yell and last year's 5th round pick out of Boise State, J.L. Skinner, they are going to be guys that push for a roster spot because I think they likely only take 4, maybe 5 safeties. So if we count them out together, Brandon Jones, P.J. Locke, Caden Stearns, those 3 guys in my eyes have a spot locked up, which means De'Aaron Turner-Yell, J.L. Skinner, and Javonte, they are all pushing for 1, maybe 2 spots max. And then finally, special teams. No real shakeup here. Riley Dixon, Will Lutz, Mitchell Fabioni, and now Marvin Mims as the primary return man, as he was last year, where he was phenomenal. That is your special teams unit. So, now that we've gone through the Broncos' entire depth charts, how would you grade the Broncos' entire roster? Scale it 1 to 100. I would give the Broncos a 80 grade, kind of like right there at the cusp of being a C+, B-. There's a lot of guys that you're like hopeful look good this year. I mean, there's not a lot of experience in your safety room between Brandon Jones and P.J. Locke. I don't think those 2 guys would start on just about every other team. And the same goes for like CB2 and center, and then wide receiver 2 and 3. You're hopeful you get good production. But I think a good way to answer this question is whichever positions you have questions about, take the starter and ask yourself, how many other teams would he start on? Patrick Surtain would start on all 32 teams. And we can go down the list of guys that meet that criteria, but it's not a very long list. But that will do it for us on today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate everyone who hangs out with us here at the Broncos Breakdown. We were going to sign off, and we will see you all later with more Broncos coverage.